Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Lindsey Graham had an interesting theory on the New York Times op-ed, connecting it to the Mueller investigation. Listen to the senator.
This op-ed piece about the personality of the president, suggesting that he's unhinged and he is incapable of being a good president without being minded, tells me a lot about the Mueller investigation. This, to me, is a signal that if there's nothing there with Russia in terms of the president working with the Russians during his campaign, the next line of attack is the man is unfit for office, he's crazy.
Now we're back to the 25th Amendment case, and of course you have the Bob Woodward book to help buoy that case, at least in D.C. press corps circles. Interesting theory from Graham. Of course, now that runs counter to that big scalp that Mueller got on Friday with George Papadopoulos getting that 14-day prison sentence for lying to the FBI. Wow.
Whoa, that's a big one.
Yeah, they knocked me over with a feather. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by our friend Andy McCarthy, former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney in Manhattan, contributing editor at National Review, now nationalreview.com. He's written on both of the topics, the Mueller investigation as well as the op-ed. Andy, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Dan, Amy, I stayed up and watched Aaron Rodgers last night, so my sympathies to you folks.
Yeah, he's the X Factor. Yeah, he's.
He was never really out, was he?
Yeah, it's Cinderella story from out of nowhere. Yeah, exactly.
There was collusion. Yeah, the medical test.
So what do you make of Lindsey Graham's supposition that there's nothing there with Russia, despite the Papadopoulos plea and sentence, and so it's all going to be 25th Amendment unfit for office rhetoric from Democrats?
Well, I about 75% agree with him, and he is making a point I try to make in my weekend column about questioning Mr. Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, about exactly what crime it is that Trump is alleged to have committed or is under investigation for, since that's supposed to be the trigger of any investigation. There's supposed to be a crime first, and then you get a prosecutor. The reason I say I only three-quarters agree with Senator Graham, or at least what's been reported about it, is I don't think that this goes to the 25th Amendment. I think the departure from the way that investigations are normally done goes to impeachment. And what I mean by that is I expect that because Mueller has not had to investigate based on a crime, that is, that the boundaries of his investigation have not been what the normal boundaries are, what the regulations require, which is the factual basis to believe a crime was committed. I believe what he will file is a report that doesn't find any prosecutable crimes, but has a lot of information in it that's unflattering of the president, erratic judgment, bringing people of questionable character and Russia connections into his campaign, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the point of that will be twofold. One will be to defend the FBI and the Justice Department for having had a rational basis to investigate, even if there was no probable cause of a crime. And secondly, I think, he can put that all in a report, and then once the Democrats win the midterms, if they do, the Congress does not need a crime, a prosecutable crime, in order to file articles of impeachment. So if there's enough unflattering information that they can inflate into high crimes and misdemeanors, they'll use it for that purpose.
Yeah, but what you're saying, what you're suggesting is just that he would write up a report that sounds like the Woodward book.
Well, the point, Dan, is that he's not supposed to be able to do that. My point in the column over the weekend is He is not counsel for a congressional impeachment committee. He's a federal prosecutor, which means his only job is to decide whether there's sufficient evidence to proceed on criminal offenses or to decline criminal offenses. That's what the regulations say. And my point is, because Rosenstein has not limited him to criminal offenses, he's at liberty, it seems, to write a report on exactly that, a kind of a here's my impression of the president's fitness for office book. And in the meantime, the president's fitness for office is a very important issue, but it's an issue for the public and the Congress. It's not an issue for a federal prosecutor.
So what does it mean now that the former Trump advisor, George Papadopoulos, has been sentenced to 14 days behind bars?
Seems to me that Mrs. Clinton said that she didn't know what C meant in classified documents. That ought to be worth at least 15 days.
I mean, is it going to affect the
No, I
investigation?
mean, you know, look, it goes to show. We were told, Amy, months ago that this was the big nugget that launched the investigation to end all investigations, right? The Papadopoulos angle. And what this demonstrates, it really just underscores what we already knew, which was this guy was never, ever charged with anything remotely connected to a conspiracy crime having to do with cyber espionage with Russia. And if you look at the lie that he was prosecuted for, it's chump change. I mean, basically, he lied about the timing of a conversation because, in the eyes of Mueller, the fact that he had the conversation with this Maltese academic, Mifsud, after he was in the Trump campaign versus just before he was in the Trump campaign, and there was a little gray area about when exactly he joined the Trump campaign, that was a material fact, and the fact that he was misleading about it was the crime of the century. Well, now we see the crime of the century is worth 2 weeks.
Yeah, I want to go back to your piece over the weekend, Mr. Rosenstein, where what is the crime? And you write, what's the legal basis for his special counsel investigation? We have a right to know. It is intolerable that after more than 2 years of digging, we still do not have an answer to that simple question. So if you were part of President Trump's legal team, would you be advising him to stop tweeting about Jeff Sessions and whistle Rosenstein in for an answer to that question and make that answer public, or demand publicly that he answer that question if he resists?
I would have stopped long ago tweeting about Sessions. And by the way, I think there's a lot more going on at the Justice Department than people seem to think. So, you know, the fact that you're not hearing about a lot of investigative activity, folks, that means that the Justice Department is functioning the way it's supposed to, which is that you don't hear anything until they're ready to charge somebody. Mm-hmm. But putting that aside, the president's kind of ridiculous jihad against his attorney general, I do think that the public deserves an answer after 2 years of the pressing question of why do we have this investigation, namely, what is the crime? And I expect that the reason we don't get that answer is twofold. Number one, there is no crime. They've been using the pretext of the Russia counterintelligence investigation, that is the investigation of Russia's interference in the election, which nobody disputes that they need to do, as a cover to investigate Trump criminally, even though there's no crime. So I think they don't want to come out and say that. Secondly, if you remember, on August 2nd, 2017, Rosenstein amplified Mueller's jurisdiction in this secret memorandum, which we haven't been allowed to see. If I were Trump, I'd force him to come clean on that one. But I suspect that what happened is he relied heavily on the Steele dossier in expanding or explaining what Mueller's jurisdiction is. The memo that he issued was right around the same time as he signed off on the FISA warrant that we know relied on the Steele dossier.
But both of those prongs that you believe explains why we don't have an answer to that question redound to the president's benefit. So why isn't he and his legal team pressing on that?
I have a feeling they may be. I think that timing in life is everything. What we keep hearing is that they may roll out some information about the Page FISA warrant this week.
Yeah, right.
I have a feeling that maybe there's actually a strategy here, and that as long as politics is being played against the president, that he's decided to wait until after Labor Day when everybody's, paying more attention again to start rolling this stuff out. At least I assume that's what's going on here. I know that people think the president is wild and crazy, and I think that myself a lot of the time, but the people around him are not. I mean, he's got very, very good lawyers, and I would not be surprised if there's a more sophisticated public strategy than people think here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what was your reaction when you heard, I think it was on Friday, that President Trump said he wanted the Sessions and the Department of Justice to investigate who the leaker is to the New York Times, who wrote the op-ed?
Yeah, I thought that was really reprehensible. I think, I understand that the president doesn't like the op-ed, and if the person who wrote it is discovered, I think I'd be the first person to support him firing that person and kicking him out of the White House, forthwith. But let's not continue to do what the left does and pretend that every single bad thing that happens is a crime. I tweeted over the weekend when I saw some of this stuff. I happen to be one of the handful of people in this country who's actually tried a seditious conspiracy case. And to say that this op-ed is sedition or treason is lunatic stuff. I mean, it just sounds crazy. The president is not the country. You can't have treason without somebody lending aid and comfort to the enemies of the United States, not the political enemies of Donald Trump. Sedition is conspiracy to use force against the United States to overthrow the system. Do you know how crazy it is, how crazy it sounds when people talk about an op-ed? I mean, really, an op-ed as sedition or treason? That's loony talk.
Totally agree. And by the way, the actual case of sedition you tried, you're referring to the first World Trade Center bombing, yeah?
I am, and you may be about to remind me that tomorrow is what the
17th
17th anniversary of the 9/11 attack, and it's 25 years since the World Trade Center was bombed.
Yeah.
So we're still talking about the same things.
He is Andy McCarthy, former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney in Manhattan, prosecuted the first World Trade Center bombers, as we were just discussing. Also contributing editor at National Review, nationalreview.com. Check out his weekend piece, Mr. Rosenstein, What is the Crime? Andy, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
You guys have a great week.
You too. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.